This Thursday marks the beginning of the 22nd annual Season for Nonviolence. It's a 64-day period that begins on January 30th, which is the anniversary of the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi in 1948, and it extends through to April 4th, which is the anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. The Season for Nonviolence was co-founded by Gandhi's grandson, Dr. Arun Gandhi, in collaboration with the Association for Global New Thought, which is a sister organization to Unity. And the purpose of this 64-day Season for Nonviolence is to embrace and encourage nonviolence as a powerful way to heal and transform our lives and our world. And over these many years, people in more than 900 cities in 67 countries have participated in the Season for Nonviolence. And yet, nonviolence itself is widely misunderstood. Often when you hear the term nonviolence, people think it just means an absence of conflict, or that to be nonviolent means that you're going to be passive or submissive. When in truth, nonviolence is an incredibly positive and courageous strategy for achieving social justice. Now, Jesus knew this, and he used nonviolence to spur revolutionary change. A lot of times people miss this. We think about the Prince of Peace. We forget that he was a political revolutionary. And people read some of his teachings about nonviolence and misinterpret them. For example, when it says turn the other cheek, they think that means to be basically a passive doormat, sort of, well, hit me again then. Or to resist not evil means to succumb or to submit to the opponent. Go the second mile sounds like it means to go along with the oppressor and just extend yourself a little further. But in fact, if we understand these teachings in the context of the time in which Jesus was speaking them and sharing them, we can see that they were actually revolutionary calls to courageous action. So let's look at what these passages said all together. This is from the 5th chapter of Matthew. You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer, but if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Within this one passage, this set of teachings, Jesus is actually offering to his listeners 3 ways to reclaim their own dignity and self-worth, not by arming themselves, but by disarming their oppressors. So let's take a little closer look at each of these. First of all, if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek also. Well, let's consider how this would have worked back then. And for this, I need a little help here, Richard. Would you step out here? Now, what I want you to understand is that I would never in a million years do this. This is strictly for demo.
Or for practice.
All right, back in that day, if you wanted to strike someone to inflict harm, you would use the right hand and hit the person's left cheek, like so. You would never use your left hand because the left hand was considered unclean and it was not to be used publicly. So it would have to be this. But Jesus says if someone strikes you on the right cheek, for it to be a strike to the right cheek would have to be this, a backhanded slap. Now, the purpose of this kind of backhanded slap, you're doing great, would be not so much to hurt someone as to insult them or to humiliate them. It was the kind of gesture that would be from someone of a superior level to an inferior level. So, for example, from a master to a slave, or from a parent to a child, or a Roman to a Jew.
Or wife to a husband.
No. What did you say? You're messing with me. All right. Anywho, so this is really significant. So Jesus was saying, if someone strikes you like this, turn the other cheek also. Now the oppressor is in a pickle, because now you got to decide what you're going to do. The only option, turned like this, which is really an act of defiance, is for the person who is inflicting the blows to do this. But if he does this, first of all, he may hurt the person, because typically you would use a fist. But even more significantly, this kind of strike to the left cheek was between equals. It was between peers. So simply by turning your cheek, you elevated your status from being of the inferior level to being an equal. Well, this would completely disarm the person. Be like, well, what do I do now? I can't do that. So that's the whole point, is to put them in a different place so they can't just follow the normal rules and do what they've always done. Thank you, my love. Well done. Same kind of thing with the second teaching. When he says, if someone asks for your coat, give them your cloak also. Okay, so here's the deal. Back then, the coat was the outer garment. The cloak was the inner garment. The cloak was essentially your clothing. So quite often, the coat was used as collateral. If someone would sue you, or you'd use it as collateral for a loan or for debt. So what Jesus is saying is, if someone sues you for your coat, give them your cloak also. Well, his listeners would have immediately known what this was implying. You're going to take off all your clothes. You're going to be standing there naked. That is not what the oppressor was expecting, right? So again, you've worked with the energy, you've moved in the direction of what they were sending your way, but you've sort of channeled that into an act of resistance. And in so doing, you throw the opponent off kilter. Causes them to have to think, what am I going to do now? Not only can this work, it actually has worked. So there's a story in a book I love called Jesus and Nonviolence. And in it, Bible scholar Walter Wink shares this story. He says, under the apartheid regime in South Africa, the authorities had for a long time sought a way to destroy a particular shantytown without success. Then one day, after most of the men and women had left for work, the army arrived. The soldiers announced that the few women there had 5 minutes to gather their things, and then the bulldozers would commence to work. Well, the women, perhaps sensing the prudery of the farm boys who largely made up the army, stood in front of the bulldozers and stripped off all their clothes. The army fled. You know, it's brilliant, right? It's brilliant. So the third one is about walking the second mile. So back in that day, it was allowed for Romans to give their heavy military pack, probably around 60 or 80 pounds is how heavy it was. They could ask a Judean to carry their pack for a mile, but no more than a mile. There were mile markers all along the road, and anything over a mile was severely punishable under military law. Well, you can see where this was going. Jesus is saying, if they ask you to carry the pack for a mile, offer to go ahead and carry it a second mile. Well, this would have completely thrown off the Roman, because now he's in that predicament, not knowing how to respond. His thought might be, wait a minute, so you're going to carry the pack, and you can just imagine the Judean saying, hey, I'll just carry it another mile for you. And the Roman thinking, wait, what's going on here? Are you trying to provoke me? Are you insulting me? Are you trying to be kind? Are you my friend? What's going on here? Not really knowing what to do. So again, by turning the tables, by moving in the direction of the oppression, but continuing on, again, in this case, you're moving from that position of being in the one down to being at the level of an equal. To walk on for that second mile would be to be doing so as an equal. It's an incredibly powerful ways to restore the sense of dignity and give people back their power. So Jesus was teaching the art of non-resistance to his disciples. This idea of taking unexpected or even exaggerated action to disarm the oppressor and very possibly spur a change of heart or a shift in their behavior. You can imagine in some of these cases where if they'd had this episode, people taking off their clothes or walking too far or whatever it is, they're like, I don't think I'll bother that person again, right? That's what you're going for. You're going for the change of heart, a shift in the heart. And that's really what all of the nonviolent movements, resistance movements throughout history have been aimed at, getting through to the humanity of people so that you can create a shift of the heart. And when you take people out of their roles and their assigned tasks and the way they've always done it, you suddenly create that space, that opportunity for them to be a human being and relate to you in that way. This is vitally important throughout history and particularly now. In his book, The Handbook of Nonviolence, Michael Nagler talks about the importance of appealing to humanity and seeing nonviolence as the mechanism for that. He says, because all violence begins in the failure or refusal to recognize another as fully human. The deeper reaches of nonviolence must involve reawakening the humanity of one's opponent. We're appealing to their desire to be human again when we keep the personhood of the other in view. This is why nonviolent resistance has been known to win over even heavily armed, highly determined opposition. He offers an example in his book that I found quite compelling. In 1963, in Birmingham, Alabama, Black marchers, inspired by the intention, quote, to win our freedom, and as we do it, set our white brothers free, in the words of one of their leaders, found themselves unexpectedly blocked by a line of police and firemen with dogs and hoses. The marchers knelt to pray. After a while, they became spiritually intoxicated. They got up off their knees as though someone had given a signal and steadily marched toward the police and firemen. Once they got within earshot, some of them said, "We're not turning back. We haven't done anything wrong. All we want is our freedom. How do you feel about doing these things?" Even though the police commissioner, a notorious segregationist, repeatedly shouted, "Turn on the hoses," the firemen found their hands frozen. The marchers walked steadily on, passing right through the lines of the police and firemen. Some of these men were seen to be crying. Power of nonviolence to shift the heart. It's almost unimaginable to think about how much courage that took, right? And so many other demonstrations. But they were filled with spirit. They were filled with God. And that gave them that courage to go forward and to march into their opponents. No wonder then that Gandhi used the term satyagraha to refer to nonviolent resistance. The technical meaning, the literal translation of satyagraha is clinging to truth. And it's more commonly translated as soul force. Soul force. You see, in order for these strategies to be effective, we are coming from the soul. And there has to be an ability to feel a oneness on a spiritual level with the other, even if they are nowhere near that level of consciousness or not in that place, no matter how hostile they may be feeling. It's that idea of being able to still stand for what you believe in while still respecting the other person, and to know that we are one. And when you have that framework, when you're coming from that consciousness, it begins to move the conversation or the situation from me against you to me and you against this situation, or me and you trying to solve this situation. You see, there's the brotherhood and the sisterhood, and we're all in this together. Well, these examples are so incredibly inspiring, and they always leave me and perhaps you wondering as well, what can I do? What can I do in my life right now to contribute to a less violent world? And let's face it, it's a pretty violent world right now, not only in terms of shootings and war and battles, but war of words and opinions and upset and fear and all of that. So what can we do? Well, in his book, The Nonviolence Handbook, Michael Nagler offers 5 different ideas, 5 basic practices for living a nonviolent life. And the first of these is avoid major media networks and outlets. Because what we don't necessarily realize or become sort of immune to is they're filled with violence. They are filled with violence and often fear evoking as a way to sort of trigger you or hook you to keep watching. It's very empowering to just turn it off and walk away. And what he is suggesting is that we turn to other sources for our news and our entertainment. And if you've ever done that, you know that that in itself can bring a lot of peace into your consciousness. And the second one, learn about nonviolence. These stories, this is a wonderful time in our country to really get familiar with history and to learn from people who've come before us. You can go to agnt.org. They have the Season for Nonviolence. There are all sorts of resources. Read about some of these folks and the incredible ways in which they lived these principles to change the world. In March, we're going to be showing a movie about the Dalai Lama, and in April here, we'll be showing Gandhi. So you'll also have an opportunity here to learn more about these amazing people. Third, take up a spiritual practice if you haven't already done so. If you don't already have one, or if you do have a spiritual practice, practice it. Meditation, contemplative prayer, heart math, whatever works for you. Because these spiritual practices take us to a deeper level of our humanity. And that's what we need, is to go deeper into our humanity, where we can meet with others at that level. Next, be more personal with others. I love this one. And really, all it's saying is that in your day-to-day life, when you're interacting with others, be there. Give them your undivided attention. It makes such a difference, even if it's just a 30-second conversation with the sales clerk or the delivery person or someone in the hall or whatever. Man, we need that right now. We need that person-to-person connection. And finally, take up a project and get active. Nothing provides as much relief or joy when you're feeling frustrated or that change is needed as to really connect with something that speaks to your heart. It could be something very small. We have lots of things here, ways to contribute to helping other people, making the world a better place, whether it's crocheting prayer shawls or writing to inmates or tutoring a child or feeding the homeless, whatever it is. Find it here or find it elsewhere. Lay hold of a project and get active. You know, really, when you add all of this up around nonviolence, what it's really saying is love one another, and more specifically, love thine enemy. Love those we perceive as the enemy. And this is the real depth of the soul work that it requires. And it's what we are being called to, particularly now in these incredibly divisive times, to connect at the level of our humanity, even as we stand for what we believe in. In this book, I think it's the Nonviolence, Jesus and Nonviolence, which was written in 2003. He said some things that really spoke to my heart, given what's going on in our country, given the climate of the times. And it's the opening of our hearts into compassion. And it says this: love of enemies is the recognition that the enemy, too, is a child of God. The enemy, too, believes he or she is in the right and fears us because we represent a threat against his or her values, lifestyle, or affluence. Our so-called enemies need to be reassured that there will be a place for them in the new society being born. When we demonize our enemies, calling them names and identifying them with absolute evil, we deny that they have that of God within them. that makes transformation possible. And then he says that the ultimate religious question today is, how can I find God in my enemy? How can I find God in that person I perceive to be the other, as my opponent, or so unlike me by whatever characteristic, whatever factor? How do I see the divine in them and connect with it? How do I continue to offer respect and dignity to that individual despite any differences? That's mighty spiritual work, and that's what we're being called into. In 1939, Gandhi wrote, "The more you develop nonviolence in your own being, the more infectious it becomes till it overwhelms your surroundings, and by might oversweep the world." So let's hold that vision together, and each of us in our own way do our part. Let's turn now to our meditation. I invite you to close your eyes and take a deep breath in and release and let it go. And one more time, breathing in deeply this beautiful sacred energy of God. And release it in love. Allow yourself to let go and relax. And knowing that you are being supported by the infinite, and that God is moving in and through you to guide your way. I invite you to connect with your heart space, feeling the peace that is there, in your mind's eye, beholding the unity of all life and all humanity, people like us and people very different from us. Open your heart and your mind to divine guidance as you ask the question, how can I contribute to a more peaceful world? Where can I build a bridge? How can I show compassion? In what way might I shift my thinking and my own heart to open it a little wider for someone else? Ask these questions and listen for your answer, your guide to living more nonviolently. Listen in the silence. Within us, we feel strength gathering within us as we channel our soul force, as we go forward living on purpose, doing our part to contribute to a world at one. And for all of this, we are grateful. Thank you, God. And so it is. Amen.